Hi, this is Marta from Ruby Soup with Pearl Juice, and in this video I'm going to talk about the books that I bought in November. So, coming up first, The Refrigerator Monologues by Catherine M. Valente. This is a newly released short story collection that is basically it's short stories about women that have been fridged. Now that's a name of a trope where a female character, usually like the girlfriend or the mother or what have you, like a loved one of usually a male superhero who gets killed off to kind of like motivate or to provide angst and drama for the male character. This was a term that was popularized by Gail Simone, who herself is kind of one of these legendary comic writers, and kind of like from there, then we got this term of women in refrigerators. I'll leave a link below to more information about that. But that's basically what this is. This is a collection of monologues about girls who have been put into the refrigerator and kind of like them telling their stories. So that sounds really interesting. I am very much looking forward to this. I also bought Ariel by Sylvia Plath. This is a poetry collection by Sylvia Plath, who was both a poet and she was the author of the novel The Bell Jar. She mostly wrote poetry, but she did write one novel, which was, as I mentioned, The Bell Jar. The Bell Jar is a book that I read a few years ago, but I really liked it. It's really interesting. It really kind of dives into these questions of mental health and gender and kind of has this very interesting depiction of the time that Sylvia Plath was living in. And and I really liked her writing style there, so I thought that I should kind of get more acquainted with her poetry. And this is her most famous poetry collection, so looking forward to that. I also bought another poetry collection, The Sun and Her Flowers by Whoopi Carr. Whoopi Carr is the author of the best-selling poetry collection Milk and Honey, which I have bought and I have read. I actually just read that this year, and I really liked it. I do admit that it has some flaws. Sometimes her poetry can become a little bit banal, but when she's good, she's incredibly good, and she really hits a nerve in the reader. So this is this year's her second volume, and I am very much anticipating getting to dive back into her writing. I also bought 2 picture books by a Taiwanese children's author, Jimmy Liao. I bought Starry Starry Night and Colors of the Wind. Now, Jimmy Liao is maybe the most famous Taiwanese children's book author. He's actually, if I am not mistaken, he's actually even kind of nominated for the 2018 Alma Literary Prize. And he, like, for instance, this book is about a blind girl who's going home on the subway and about her experiences with was losing her vision and what that means. And this book, Starry Starry Night, is about bullying and loneliness. So these books seem very interesting and very diverse. And I actually have not read that much Taiwanese literature. I have read Liang, who wrote The Butcher's Wife, but otherwise I haven't read that much Taiwanese literature. So this is going to be an interesting thing to dive into. This year I went to the Sweden Finn Literary Festival that was here in Stockholm. It's basically a festival where Finnish-speaking authors that write in Sweden and live in Sweden kind of get together to kind of promote their books. And they also had a selling point where they were selling books. And from there I was able to find this. Bessia e Lucia by Ariel. This is a book published for the first time in 1944. It's one of these classic children's literature in Finland. And it's a depiction of, like, it started out was that Yrjö Kokko, who was serving in the Finnish military, he was writing letters to his children, and he was telling a fairy tale. And then when he came back from the war, then he made it into a book, and this was the result. And it's a kind of like a depiction of friendship that turns into a romance between a Menninkäinen, which is a Finnish kind of imp, and a fairy. And the name's even like Pessi is the imp, and he's supposedly very pessimistic. And then there's Lucia, who's the fairy, who's very naive and such. And this version comes like, it's been published with a lot of different illustrations, but for instance, it kind of like has these kinds of illustrations. And one thing that is interesting about this is that these kinds of stories of an imp and a fairy falling in love and getting married, they were fairly common back in the days when Finns were still kind of pagans and they kind of believed in these creatures. There were like many folklores and songs about imps and fairies falling in love and getting married, and about like basically like the clash between the two lifestyles that happened there. So this is kind of based a little bit on Finnish folklore. So that's going to be really interesting to get into. I also bought a book written by a Finnish writer who lives here in Stockholm. Her name is Marit Turtiainen. I actually attend the Finnish book club that she runs here in Stockholm at Skärholmen. And this is her second novel. It's called Listen Cit It. It's about a Sweden Finn, like a Finnish-speaking woman who lives in Sweden, who had a relationship with a Turkish man, and then he left for Turkey. And then her daughter, who is born in Sweden, she wants to go to Turkey and meet her father, and things kind of take off from there. And this sounds really interesting because a lot of, at least my generation, Sweden Finns, they're kind of like, they tend to have like one Finnish parent, and then they usually have like either a Swedish, the second parent is usually Swedish, or as in here in Stockholm, more often than not, the second parent is usually like from Turkey or from another foreign background. So, and especially when I went to a Finnish speaking school, then we had a lot of biracial kids that had a Finnish mother and a Middle Eastern or African or Asiatic parents. So this is going to be interesting to get into. And then I also bought Tallow by Liao, which means the banana house. And this is a own voices depiction of working in a Chiquita banana factory during the 70s. Liao himself worked in one of these when he was younger. And I saw him talk at the Finnish institution there at the Sweden Finn Literary Festival, where he talked about this book. And it sounds really interesting. I really like working class literature, and I'm also very much into getting into the Sweden Finn literature here. So this is actually a good combination of both. So that's going to be interesting to get into. Well, that's about it. I had to kind of keep it short this month because Christmas is coming around, and that's going to be really expensive. But I'll just see you guys in my next video. Hope you like this book haul. Click the like button or subscribe or comment down below if you want to talk about these books, and I'll see you in my next video.